So tonight we begin, first of all, with the acknowledgement of what today is worldwide in the Jewish world. It has been widely commemorated as the Yom HaShoah, the Day of Remembrance of the Holocaust, remembering the 6 million lives that were lost. We'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the class, because there is a unique remembrance when it comes to Judaism. We say Yizkar all the time. We don't just say remember. Remembrance is a positive act. Don't forget is the sort of the extension of negative. But when you remember, you have to do something. You actually have to do something to remember. When Yosef was in jail, he said to the butler, he said, "I want you to remember me." And then it says, "Lo zachar," he didn't remember him, "Vayishkachehu," and he forgot him. This is the double expression. When you don't do something positive, then by default, what starts to happen is you do forget. When people say, "Al tishkach," or "Lo tishkach," don't forget, has to include a remembrance. What's a remembrance? Something positive. We'll talk more about that soon. But especially now, as we start to see a lot of the repetitious behavior of what happened in the 1930s for the Jewish people, and kids today don't have an active remembrance of what happened in those years. Like stories like Kristallnacht and stories that, the ghettos and the Yellow Star and the degradations and so on. That's where it begins. It doesn't begin all of a sudden in massacres and concentration camps. It begins in a slow process, because that's how the world starts to acclimate themselves to hatred. So
the Germans start like 3 years beforehand, like
it was
little kids that
it was more than that. It was from 1933 that they really, when they came to power, they really began almost immediately implementing laws restricting Jews from work, restricting Jews from businesses, limiting them from public offices and things like that. There was one Jewish minister that was assassinated early on, right before Hitler came to power. There was already things starting to take place in behavior that made the Jews feel we're already being diminished. And then once one thing happens, the next thing happens. It's less shocking. So yeah. So we'll learn more about what we have to do to remember, because it's a positive act, and each and every one of us should engage in that. There's another factor that we have the month of Nisan, which is still a joyful month. It's a happy month. We don't say the Tachanun through the whole month, because it's a month of celebration from Passover. And yet there is this day which sort of brings us down a little bit in the feeling of sadness. So some of the rabbis taught that maybe by the fact that it is in the month of Nisan, there's something that we need to do on a more positive measure, as opposed to just cry and light the candle and feel sad about the loss. There's almost a positive measure that we need to do to say, let's live for the 6 million. Let's do something in their memory, in their merit, to keep them alive. And that way it becomes at least somewhat of a positive day in some regard. But we'll get back to that. But in the meantime, we have a double Torah portion this week. Of course we do. Double header. And it's Tazria-Metzorah. So this is where we'll begin.
Last year too, wasn't it?
It could have been. It's every year besides 1 out of 4 is typically a combined of the combined portions, because what happens is when you have a leap year in Judaism, you have a whole extra month, not just an extra day. So when you have the extra month, then you have to spread them out a bit. So you have to fill those extra weeks. So you have Tazria-Metzorah separate weeks, Achremos Kedoshim separate weeks, Bahar B'chukotai separate weeks, and then sometimes you need a fourth one. So sometimes it'll be Chukat Balak, Matos Maseh, or Netzavim Vayelech. One of those 3 will also be split up.
Those were doubled up last
year. Yeah, because last year was a regular year as well. So Tazria-Metzorah is a very, very interesting Torah portion, talking all about spiritual maladies, purity and impurity a lot of the laws that seem to be a little abstract for us, but I'd like to just back up a little bit to last week's Torah portion. Last week's Torah portion was Shmini, which finished with the laws of Kashrut and what you're allowed to eat, what you're not allowed to eat. So what is the connection between that and the laws that we're now going to discuss about spiritual impurity? It is the fact that not everything that affects us is visible. I think I mentioned this last year, that we are a very tangible people nowadays in this generation. We're very much based on I can feel it, I can touch it, I can see it. Beneath that, if I can't really see it, it's not real. And that is a lacking in our behavioral characteristics and our abilities, because that prevents us from ever stopping to meditate and be able to try and absorb energy and so on. But we see our phones, we're getting a lot of information being given to us, being fed into us, and we're not really in that state where we can say what's beneath that, what's beneath the surface. So the Torah is telling us the laws of Kashrut is the first key to sensitivity, to becoming spiritually sensitive. If you become affected by what you eat in a positive way, you suddenly become a little bit more aware of spirituality that's floating around you, that might be present in the energies that aren't tangible, that you can't touch them. So let's say we eat the foods that the Torah prescribes. What's supposed to be the effect on us? I'm going to be a little bit sensitive to people's feelings. I'm going to be a little bit more sensitive to, taking care of something and not letting it just be ruined. I'm going to be a little bit more careful with my words, because we start to detect a little bit more sensitivity or spirituality in some of the things that we might not have noticed before. It seems like, wow, how can you go on such a leap to say that what you eat is going to affect that? Well, it's not crazy to say that you are what you eat. It's clearly proven that you are affected by the foods that you consume. We are clearly affected by the forever chemicals in foods. We're affected by the artificial additives that are in foods. We're affected, the kids who go hyper with, the dyes and the other things. And we don't even know the effect that it's had on, whether it's autism and other situations that have risen in later years based on the foods that we've eaten. It could be multiple factors, but foods have a very big role to play. Look at a child when they're born. They have the milk from the mother, which has so many nutrients and so many vitamins and minerals that it can give them that solid start to help them not get sick later in life. That's an unbelievable effect of what consumption can do. And we know basically you drink coffee, you stay awake, you have sugar, you get a little bit cranky or whatever. There are foods that you clearly can see, but then you go on a level below that, or a level maybe a little less visible. You say, well, what about an animal that eats other animals? You eat that animal, you now have absorbed some of that behavior, some of the qualities that animal had. There's one interesting animal that says it's called a ra'ah, a bird, a ra'ah. And it says it's not kosher. And why is it called a ra'ah? This is last week's Torah portion. Why is it called a ra'ah? Because it can see very, very far. And he uses the example in the Talmud. It says it can be on a mountaintop in Babylonia and it can see a carcass in Israel, which is like thousands of miles, a couple thousand miles. That's how good its vision is. Yeah. It's double. I think it's Aleph Ayin. Or Aleph too. Anyway, so then, did you see that there? It's called the Ra. One of those birds. Last week's Torah portion. So anyway, so this bird is not kosher. So the question that's asked by the commentaries is, wait a second. It's got such a good ability to see. Shouldn't that be a quality that you would then say is definitely should make it kosher? Because everyone wants to have vision like that. Everyone wants to be able to see well beyond, the capabilities. Like they say carrots helps your vision. Not really sure if that's the case. Yeah. But so the rabbis say, but it's interesting what language is used. It stands on the mountain in Babylonia. What does it see? It sees carcasses in Israel. So yes, it's got great vision, but what does it notice? It notices death. It notices the negativity because it's a vulture. So it's a vulture, so it can see the carcass because that's what it wants to eat. So if you can be somebody with your excellent vision and all your perception and powers of observation, but yet you only see all the negativity and you only see, it's terrible things that are going on in the world and it becomes a negativity bias, you're not a kosher bird. You're not a kosher animal. Your good vision should be able to perceive all the good that's out there and the positivity that's in the world. That's what makes you kosher. So even in the behavior, subtly, of some of the animals, we don't want to consume that because we become affected by it.
It's a vulture?
It may be. I'm not sure. It uses that as an example that it sees the.
Because I'm looking at the birds on that page, I see duck. And yeah, there's two names for the common vulture.
Anyway, it's just one example. I just I'm not going to go too into that because it's last week's Torah portion, but it's actually, sorry, I don't know if it's in Shemini. It's in Devarim, page 1142. Page 1142, 1143, verse 13. It's various. It just says species of vulture. So the Ra'ah, the Aya, the Daya, and Lamina. So those are the three types of vultures. So the Ra'ah sees the carcasses a long way. So another example would be fish, right? So fish has fins and scales. Why is that so important for us to consume a fish that has fins and scales and not one that doesn't? Because those fish have a protective outer coating, which gives them not only a protection from the elements in the water, but from the other outside influences that might come to attack them. So a Jew, if they're going to consume the species of the sea, they should remember that there's a big sea out there, and there's a lot of stuff that could be negative influence, especially as it's rubbing right on you, unlike air or land, which can be at a distance, right? But the water's right there, and the protection of the scales reminds you that you need to always stay a little bit protected. The talus is almost like that. When you're praying, the talus surrounds you with this cocoon of spiritual protection that doesn't allow you to get distracted by things outside. And then the fins gives you the movement so you can progress in life. How do you know if a fish is alive? Because if it's just going downstream, it could be dead, it could be alive, but if it's swimming upstream like the salmon does, because it's got fins and it can move and get about, it's alive. So when you're just going along with the flow, yeah, you might be alive because you're not dead yet. But if you really want to be alive, you've got to stand up to the pressures of what's going on around you and say, no, with my fins I can move. So even within the different species, there's going to be lessons of what we can take in. So you start to eat like this, and all of a sudden you start to believe in Hashem more. Start to see Hashem in the world. Start to say, if someone else is saying, it's just nature. I just made money because I did a good deal. The guy who's eating kosher is like, no, I saw it differently because I now have the spiritual sensitivity that's given me the perception that I can recognize a little bit more beneath the surface than maybe another person. You're just saying stuff. No, I really see it. I really see it. So that's why that comes before this portion, which now is a whole world of what's going on in a spiritual sense. Because it's going to talk about purity and impurity, and we're like, you dirty? Go take a shower. You clean? You're fine. No, but you're spiritually unclean. What does it mean, spiritually unclean? So let's talk about just one example of that so we can understand a little bit. When someone comes in contact with a dead body, You might not feel anything changes in you. You might not feel that you've become a little bit spiritually impure. But if you're spiritually sensitive and your whole existence is the energy of life and connecting to life and feeding on life, and that's the energy that you live with and you sort of have as your vibe, then when you are in contact, even in proximity to a deceased individual, someone who's no longer alive, it takes a little bit of that energy away. It just diminishes that strength of the energy that you have built through the understanding the connection of life.
Looking like on your phone, water, seeing dead bodies can also
Right.
have that kind of.
So that has an effect on your mind. No question about it. That'll affect your mind and your perception and those things that you comprehend and you grasp. But we're talking about your very energy, the very essence of your neshama, when you are in contact with someone who's deceased. It lowers, like if you're looking at yourself like a battery charged, like at 100%, that's your neshama level. And then when you are in contact with the dead, it lowers down to 80%.
You mean like physical contact, not just like seeing dead bodies on the
But
road.
in the proximity, but yeah, physical contact, being within 4 cubits, 6 feet. The people who do have a special job to do chevra kadisha, to take care of the dead, they gird themselves tremendously. They go to the mikveh all the time to get themselves feeling a little bit more pure and elevated because of that. Plus, they know they're doing the mitzvah, so they're getting a little bit of energy from that. But if you look at yourself like you're a cell phone, and you get strength by the things that increase your spiritual energy, and you lose strength by not. I want to give you a practical example that's really pretty wild, and we may have touched on it previous year. Why is it that a woman who has a menstrual cycle needs to go to the mikvah to have the purification spiritually in her life? Or even more so, a woman who has a baby, right? She has a baby, and she then needs to also go to the mikvah and have that re-spiritualization, so to speak, of adding spirituality to her life. What is that happened that requires that cleansing, so to speak, spiritually?
It's almost like a loss.
A potential life. A potential life. It's not by accident that women might get into bad moods around the periods. What do you think? It just happens by chance? They're subconsciously, in the energy levels, they're losing a potential life. There's something in there that is diminished a little bit. And by going to the mikvah, spiritual cleansing of rainwater has the ability to be able to bring you back to that source of energy, because that's the source of life, because that's where we all came from. In the womb, we were surrounded by water. That was our source of life that gave us life. So we go back into the womb, so to speak, in the mikvah to give us that source of life. It's really what it is. And then when they have the baby, you might say, but they have a life. It's a beautiful baby.
Separation.
You had 2 lives, and now you only have 1. It's a huge loss for your own personal body. For your family, it's an unbelievable gain. And for you got a baby, it's the most beautiful thing. But your body's still reeling from that, which is where perhaps postpartum depression comes from. That you lose that life that was within you. It was almost like 50% of your energy now is dropped. And so spiritually, you're not going to pick these things up if you haven't attuned and accustomed yourself to do it. And that's why last week was all about eating those foods, because when you do, you will be able to stay strong. And one of the most famous ones, by the way, is not eating meat and milk together. Because when you have meat, you're eating death. When you drink milk, you're drinking life. There's no more classic food item that gives life to children and in any species than milk. It enhances life from the very beginning. And yet you're going to have that with death. You now have spiritually confused yourself a little bit as to the distinction between that which is the most holy and amazing and that which is a reality, but it's also the saddest and most tragic. So if you're going to have it, because it is part of life, is death, you have to make sure you keep it distinguished so you do not spiritually confuse yourself as to, yay, death might be good and life might be bad. But no, you always understand the difference between the two. I'm not saying that terrorists are terrorists because they eat milk and meat together, but I'm saying you can become a little bit confused. And by the way, that confusion exists every day in the world. Even people who are moral and good people, they suddenly don't understand between, evil, those who want to take lives, the Iran regime killing 40,000 of their own civilians, and now all of a sudden, how could you be killing those people? Like, they don't understand the qualifications of what makes life good and what makes death bad, because there's a little bit of confusion there. But we become very clear on that based on what we eat.
What about like the fake stuff? Like now you have like the fake cheese, and you can have like a fake cheeseburger. You have like the fake meat, you can have the fake cheeseburger. Like that's, I understand it's like technically okay, but isn't that like not in the spirit of what you're saying? You know?
So Maimonides actually has an interesting take on this. And Maimonides says that you would think that that would be questionable, because if the Torah is telling you not to have crab, don't go and have fake crab. But the Torah is telling you not to have crab, not because it's disgusting, not because it's horrible for you, but because it was a command from Hashem. If you say, the reason I'm not having crab is because what a disgusting creature, I don't want that anyway, and I don't want the fake crab, I don't want the real crab, I don't want anything to do with crab, right? Then you're not really doing it so much because Hashem said so. You're doing it because you've disgusted yourself with it, right? It's disgusting for Hashem, it's disgusting as a result for you too, but not because of its look or its species. So the Rambam says, if you have something that shows that you really would love to have the real thing, but you're not because Hashem's having it, then go ahead and have the fake one, because that actually shows that you would love to have the real one. The only reason you're not is because the Torah said so. He actually told me this, one of the folks that were here for Pesach. He said, why does Sephardim have the custom of right after Pesach, the second after it's over, they're making this memuna, they're making this, these doughy foods and having chametz the minute after it's over. Like, just calm down. Like, settle down. It's like those lines at the pizza store after Passover. It's out of control. Like, come on, you really couldn't handle not having pizza for a week? You can't wait till tomorrow? Their point is that we want to eat the chametz right away to show we love chametz. And we would have had chametz for the whole 8 days. But Hashem told us not to. So we didn't do it because we were listening to Hashem. But we get more credit by showing how much we would have loved to have the challah and the chametz and all the breads if we have it right after. Because if we say, who cares, who even wants the chametz anyway, then Hashem says, I don't know if it was such a big deal then for you to keep Pesach. It wasn't like, you don't get extra credit for that.
It was nice this year because like the next day it was Shabbos and we had
You go right away, right? Yeah. So that's an interesting thing that should, I've there was a time when my sister was reading a children's book to my niece, and it was by Dr. Seuss, Green Eggs and Ham. Yeah. And she asked, what's ham? And my sister said, oh, it's disgusting. And I remember this lesson, and I said, no, you can't say it's disgusting. Actually, green eggs are disgusting. The ham is fine. I mean, it's just not for us to eat. Say, it could be delicious. We're just not allowed to eat it. Because what's going to happen if you say it's disgusting? One day she might accidentally have some, and she'll be like, it's not disgusting at all. It tastes pretty good. Hey, mother was lying about everything. Yeah. So you can't say that the reason we're keeping these laws is because it's disgusting. But this carries over. This carries to the laws of spirituality as well. No one is going to the mikvah because they are physically dirty, because there's something disgusting about any of the processes of spiritual impurity. It is a sensitivity factor. In order to become a little bit upgraded in your sensitivity towards spiritual things, You need to put yourself in the position that your body will be able to become subservient to your soul and be able to detect on the radar of spirituality what is holy and what is not. I cannot blame a single person if they do not eat kosher food, they don't have any kind of mikveh in their life, any kind of laws or understanding of these concepts, to then say in any way, shape, or form, I don't see what's so special about that mitzvah. I don't see what's so special about that particular thing in this world. I won't treat a living thing with such great respect because I don't detect its holiness. I don't detect the godliness in even an animal to be able to be kind to it. Those who do, if you are sensitive to animals, not cruel to animals, you're already picking up on the spiritual sensitivity that is something that we strive to reach. And if you get through this process further, then you get it even more. And one of the biggest ones, and this is what I want to address now in the Torah portion, was the malady of Saras. At Saras, look at the, fell back to Shemini. Saras was the 678, 679. God spoke to Moses to convey his words to Aaron, saying, if a person develops a wool white spot, egg membrane white spot, a snow white spot on them. Now, where did this come from? Why did this happen? It says they become impure and the Kohen must examine them. So why does this happen? Sorry, thank you. I'd like to read from the Rambam, Maimonides. He describes in his commentary on the tractate Avot, Pirkei Avot, he writes a description of how this comes to be, how a person gets, because a lot of us think automatically, oh, you speak bad, Lashon Hara, you get leprosy. Okay, so that's the case why none of us get it today. Because a lot of us are talking Lashon Hara, so why don't we get it anymore? And then, I sort of have a question on that, because who got leprosy famously? It's not really called leprosy, it's just the closest malady. It's a non-fatal ailment, skin lesion. Miriam got it. Now, was she talking bad? I don't think she was talking bad. She was trying to say to her brother Aaron, I think we should do something about Moses, our brother, because he's become so connected to Hashem, he forgot about his wife. Like, he hasn't been with her for a long time. I don't think it's fair. Like, how should we deal with this? Should we go over and tell him, like, that he's doing something wrong? So I don't think anyone can qualify that as talking hatefully, evil speech. Like, she was trying to help. And yet we say, Lashon Hara. I think she gets a bad rap for that. And I think everyone that got this Saras got a bad rap for talking so bad. I mean, it's almost like childish when we say that. Like the kids know, you got the leprosy because you spoke bad, you said Lashon Hara. Not the case. Here's what the Rambam says. The Rambam says, it doesn't mean Lashon Hara is bad speech. It means you've lightened your speech to now talk about things that are not important, not relevant, not necessary. Just chatting. You know, people say all the time, I was just talking. Small talk. We're just kibitzing. We're kibitzing around. You know what happens when you kibitzing around? Inevitably, there's going to be something said that is either offensive or someone's hurt or there's a comment made about somebody, a third party. You're not doing it intentionally. You're not looking to harm them. You just say, oh, I saw this, such a funny thing this guy did, and it just happens. So when you're talking non-intentionally and you're just talking it's elevator conversation. The Rambam says it leads to saying things that are actually wrong. So silly talk starts going to saying something that's wrong. Saying something that's wrong talks to saying something against the Torah. Say something against the Torah, you end up talking something against Hashem. Kafar be'ikar. Till you end up saying something that's completely opposed to Hashem and you realize, oh, I think I went a bit far there, saying, this kind of bad language or bad words or blasphemous words. But because it's a spiral, it starts off with saying, my speech has no direction. When it has no direction, where's it going to go? It can go anywhere. It can very quickly go into the gutter. And it can go, and then if you think about what people want to do is they like to boost themselves up in the eyes of somebody else with a funny story, with saying something about somebody else, and eventually that's where it gets nasty. So the actual person who got Saras wasn't somebody who spoke bad about someone. It was someone who was so spiritually sensitive, like we've been talking the whole time. They were able to detect at the first moment that they said something that didn't produce a positive result, that didn't have a positive outcome. They noticed a sign on their skin that Hashem was telling them, stop. You're too good for this. He says, Adam, a man. A man means a person who already has a good reputation, someone who's got their own credibility. And he gets a reminder, don't go down that path. For us, today, we're so far gone. We say so many things today that are just a ready next step, from without even realizing it. Whether it's a dishonest thing, or whether it's something that we say about somebody else, and even if it's with the same intention as Miriam, where we're looking out for somebody, we're just quick to say, "Oh, you heard of this guy did such a terrible thing." We've lost a little bit of that sensitivity. We're not on that level. But the Miriams of the world were on that level, and Hashem was doing a kindness to them, a favor to them, to say, "I'm going to give you a reminder." Before it gets to that stage of devolving into something really bad, I'm going to put the brakes on you. I'm going to tell you, oh, look. And then be like, okay, got to be extra careful. If you got Saras, you were a holy person. You were a person of a very high spiritual caliber. Almost like the person who, when they came in contact with the dead, felt this degrading of their spiritual self. They felt it, and it was real, and it was tangible. Why? Because the higher you are, the more spiritually sensitive you become, both to the things that you say and do, and to the things that you experience outside of yourself as well. It was an opportunity for them to go through a stage of intentional cleansing, where they would bring themselves back to the highest level they possibly could. Which is why, interestingly, Miriam didn't first get the sign on her house, which it says first there was a sign on the house, got the lesion, and sometimes then it went to the clothes, and if you still didn't get it, then it went to you. But see, she was on such a high spiritual level that Hashem wanted to give her the opportunity to remedy herself immediately without going through stages where it would be, potentially already starting to degrade her. It was first the walls of the house, and then the clothing.
Oh, I remember the okay.
Yeah, and then you got it if it was like the third strike, you're out. You got the lesion on you. Just a completely irrelevant tangent. What color skin were the Jews? The Israelites? What color skin did they have? So it says that in the Mishnah of Negaim, where it discusses all the different lesions, actually in the Torah it says the lesions would show up in different colors, and it would affect the hair on your arm, if you had even a little bit of hair on your arm. And if it was black or brown, it says that's normal. That's normal. So we know that the Jews in the desert, the Israelites, had black or brown hair. So they weren't like blonde, German, look, whatever, Swedish. Black or blonde hair. And then it says with the skin color in the Mishnah, it says, how would they know the contrast of the white on the white? Because a white lesion. The guy's a white skin. How would you know the contrast? So the Mishnah in the Gaim says that you'd always be able to tell because it was white like snow, and the skin of the Jew was the color of boxwood. Boxwood. Let's do a quick search on ChatGPT the color of boxwood, and we'll find out what color the Israelites were. Were they boxwood color? It's this color. So it's like an olive, light brown, somewhat a little bit darker, sort of tanned complexion, but not dark.
Right now is Mediterranean.
Right. It's the Mediterranean look, almost like the Italian look, the Greek. But it was not African dark, and it wasn't European white. And it's interesting because a lot of people say, like, oh, what were the first Jews? The first Jews. And yeah, based pretty much now on what an Israeli looks like today, living in Israel for a little while. So what about the Jews who were whiter? What about the Jews who were darker? Right? So there's an interesting discussion. And by the way, this has only come up 200 years. Barely anything in the Talmud or in Jewish literature talks about the color of skin. It almost nothing that brings up the importance or any relevance to the color of skin. It was almost like it's not a mention. The only reason I mention it is because in this subject, it touches on it for the first time, or the only time that we could possibly know. But what it does say in the discussions with regards to the stories of the Talmud, it says, where you went to the places of the world, those places would affect your appearance. An example, if you went to the Far East, there were a lot of sandstorms. So Hashem made it that your eyes were a little bit more skinny, or in a way that the sand wouldn't get in your eyes. And in certain places where there was more marshlands, your feet were a little bit wider. Hashem would give you the phenotype, not just the genotype, to be in that particular way, in that particular area. So it's possible that over generations and over time, we get impacted by the phenotype of the environment of the place that you're in. You take a guy from Italy, you bring him to the Arctic, for 3 generations, those kids are going to start becoming a little lighter. That's just how it is, by the environmental factors that happen to that space. So I don't think there's any way to say, well, if I don't look like boxwood, am I not a genuine, Jewish genetic Jew? No, there's effects that happen outside of the even the shapes of. It says the shapes of the Babylonians' heads were different shapes than everybody else. They were more egg round, sort of oval shape. Why? Because it says the midwives, when they would use forceps, when they would take the babies out, would squash the heads. And eventually it became like a thing amongst the Babylonians. So anyway, that's just interesting to totally side point. But yeah, exactly. We have evolved to some degree. It's interesting. Maybe this is off the record, but there's a Chabad rabbi in China, in Hong Kong. He's been there for quite a while. And I noticed some of his kids look a little Chinese. He's married to a Chabad wife. He's a Chabad guy. His kids look a little bit Chinese. Not saying like they're full Chinese. They do look a little bit. Russian Jews look like Russians a little bit. There's something in the environment, in the culture that affects. I don't know. It's in science. We were in 9th grade. They said there's genotype and phenotype. Phenotype could take generations to impact, but I just thought I've seen it. Ashkenazi Jews from Europe come to Israel. Within 2 generations, marrying other Ashkenazi Jews, they're a little bit darker in complexion. Happens in Florida.
That's different.
This is from the sun.
Most are Jews too. It's also they're marrying someone who's different than them, and you're mixing.
My mother-in-law is from Toronto, white. My father-in-law is from Borough Park, white. And 3 or 4 of the kids are just much darker complexion, and their kids have become darker complexion. Shui's much darker, and his kids have become darker. Just saying, it can be environmental. There can be environmental factors. Yeah. But even from a younger age, they're already born with a little bit more of a darker complexion. It's not just that they become tanned. Their skin almost, or the something becomes a little bit more susceptible, a little bit more. The pigmentation becomes a little bit more susceptible.
It's just adapting to the area, to where
Yeah.
you are. If you're up north in Canada, you're not going to be dark.
No.
You're staying indoors.
Yeah.
It's cold.
Right, but it can affect generations. That's what I'm saying. It can affect even the children. The children in Canada are just born whiter than the children born in Israel, even if that's where they originate. So anyway, yeah, totally not on the subject per se. So anyway, so back to the idea of the spiritual sensitivity. So we talked about the malady of Saras, and we talked about how it can also be in the for a woman to go to the mikveh. There's an interesting mitzvah for a man as well, that a man also has a requirement to go to the mikveh in a similar way, which is not necessarily the same degree as a woman, when there is an emission of seed as well. And so there was always a custom that the man also would go to the mikveh at times, when the woman would go as well, and other times during some would go every single day, because you don't know what happens at night or any other time. So you start your day with an immersion in that spiritual reinvigoration opportunity. Now, another point that's from the very first part of the Torah portion, that it says that speak to the children of Israel and tell them that when a woman conceives and has a child, so we're going to talk about the spiritual, sort of connotations of levels of purity and impurity, but it just mentions that when Tazria-Metzorah Zachar, when there is the conception, and then there is a birth of a boy, and then there is a conception, and then there's a birth of a girl. And Rashi says, why does it have to divide between the two? What does it say? When you have a child, this is the levels of purity and impurity. Why does it have to say, Isha ki Tazria, a woman who has conceived and then gives birth to a boy? So the reason is, as Rashi points out, if you want to know what is the determining factor of whether the child is a boy or a girl, if the woman has ovulated first and then there is conception after that, there is the intercourse after that, that the semen and the egg meet, but it's after ovulation, it's going to be a boy. If there is the intercourse first and the seed is still alive inside the woman when she ovulates, then it's going to be a girl. So if it's first the man and then the woman in order, that's what Rashi says. Rashi says. It's something, and by the way, there are people who have sworn by this, sworn by it.
Yeah, they've also sworn by meat and potatoes.
No, they're sworn by the timing, because there is an interesting halachic ramification of this. Because if a woman has a short menstrual cycle and goes to the mikveh, she's always going to maybe be intimate with her husband right before ovulation, and then they have a bunch of girls, and they never have a boy, because those times of conception are always right before she ovulates. And then there are those who have longer menstrual cycles and they ovulate a little bit later, and then it's going to be a bunch of boys. So there are times that the rabbi might say, well, let's see if we can shorten things a little bit. Even for conception, the rabbis do that, where they say, let's do things in a timing way that maybe you haven't been able to conceive because you haven't been intimate during the time of potential ovulation. So you can certainly do that for conception, and maybe even for the gender, there is ways to maneuver things around.
Anyone that's followed that?
Yes, 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 and it's worked. That's been correct. Has been correct. And if Rashi says it, he would say things that have been passed down from generation to generation. I'm curious to know if science would have any study on it, but that's something that if you're able to figure out, there are ways you can check if you're ovulating, and you can see that there's different temperatures, thermometers, and things like that. Yeah, but this is not really a reproductive class per se. So anyway, but no, Kiva, before you have a go, we'll give you all the tips next time. Yeah. So anyway, but then we have the mitzvah of bris here as well, because once it says that a woman conceives a boy, gives birth to a baby boy, it says 8 days is the first time we see the mitzvah of bris in the Torah, outside of Avraham being commanded to circumcise his son Yitzchak, but that was before the Torah was given. So here we have the mitzvah number 1 of any baby boy's life is to be circumcised. And is the mitzvah on the parents or is the mitzvah on the child? If the mitzvah is on the parents, but if the child is not given a bris, it now becomes his responsibility at a later time to do so. The numerical value of the word bris, bet resh yud taf, bet is 2, resh is 200, yud is 10, taf is 400, 612. So when you do the bris, you basically tell your child you have 612 mitzvahs left. You've done one. That's you're good to go with the first. So that's
So in the midbar they didn't have this.
so they were given off from having circumcision, and because of that, they were given off from having the carbon pesach, because it says you can't have the carbon pesach unless you're circumcised. So they missed, aside for the first year, because the first year everyone was circumcised. Whoever was not circumcised in Egypt was circumcised before they left Egypt. And they left Egypt circumcised. And then the first year they had a carbon pesach, they had a Passover reenactment of the first year they'd come out of Egypt. And that's when they had Pesach Sheni, because there was some who said, oh, we missed it. And they gave them the second chance. But the year after that, they didn't do it. Why? Because there were already people being born in the family that did not have a bris. They couldn't partake. And for 39 years, they did not do carbon pesach and they did not do bris. Why? And this is a very important point to note. That the bris, it says, would have been dangerous for infection and healing, or lack of healing, because the sand is blowing. The sand is blowing, and it gets into there, and it's a disaster. So that's why they said, no bris, risking life. Why? The Torah says, v'chai bahem. All the mitzvahs of the Torah, you should only do them if you live by them, not die by them. Unlike other religions, there is no commandment to die by the mitzvahs. It is living by them, which means you're feeling sick on Yom Kippur, you eat. You need to go to the hospital on Shabbos, you drive to get there. You do the things that live by them, not to die by them.
You said 39 years? Right?
Yes.
So what changed 39 years
They got
later?
to Israel. They were now in Israel, out of the desert.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
They had no sandstorms anymore. They were now in more of a civilized place where they could have homes and hospitals and things that were taken care of. And so actually when they got to Israel, they had a massive bris ceremony for everyone who didn't have a bris. So much so, you want the details?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So much so, they had so many foreskins, they made a mountain out of them. And they called that the mountain of the foreskins. And then they partook in the Passover offering for the first time in 39 years. And they celebrated Pesach. But that was a big bris ceremony that they were involved in. I mean, these were real warriors, by the way. These weren't your, emasculated children that we have today. It's a These are the real deal. They just took a stone, they took a rock, and they just said, "I'll do what I have to do," and they took care of business. And that was the biggest Pesach they had because they didn't have Pesach for 39 years, Passover offering. So yeah, so that's the mitzvah of bris with regards to that being the opening moment. And this is an interesting thing. Why the 8th day? Why not the 7th day? Why not the 9th day? Why the 8th day? And by the way, again, in consistency to what we were just saying of Achai Bahem, if the baby is yellow, which means they're jaundiced, their liver's not working so well yet, that means the blood flow might be problematic. If they got a bris, we delay the bris. The Torah says on the 8th day, there's a chance, even a slight remote chance, that it's a risk to the baby. We do not give a bris. So many of these laws, by the way, that it's very hard people to say that the Torah is like, doing things detriment to our health. No, anytime it is detriment to the health, we say suspend, pause. But for the most part, the 8th day is the correct day for it because that day, and this is scientifically proven, the platelets are at the highest count in the hemoglobin level. That means the wound will close and heal the best it can out of any other day in the first few months of the baby's life. Strange. 8th day.
Are there brises on Shabbat?
Yes. Yes. You do bris on Shabbat because that's the 8th day. The only reason you wouldn't do it on Shabbat is if it's a danger. It's a risk. But we've had brises on Shabbat. We had a bris on Yom Kippur. Mark Henslowitz's baby was the bris was on Yom Kippur after Musaf. Yeah. Yeah. No. Unless you have people waiting till the breakfast to say, "Hey, where's the bris food? What's going on?" My brother's bris was on Tisha B'Av, which was also a fast day, and there was no food until the very end. But that's just just to come back to that. I want to put a bow on that idea. There was a great rabbi, and his name was Chaim Soloveitchik. He was Chaim of Brisker Yeshiva, and he was very, very strict. Every ruling that he would give was the strictest ruling. But then, when it came to things like bris, things like women who were weak on Yom Kippur, pregnant, nursing, he would right away say to them, eat right away, eat. And then they would say, "But Rabbi, you're giving everyone these like you're signing off like too many of these like free passes, like to go and eat on Yom Kippur and to break the Shabbos on Shabbos. Like it's too quick. You're a strict guy. All of a sudden now you're so lenient." I mean, the woman says, "I'm a little tired. I'm a little weak. I'm nursing a baby. Go eat a sandwich. Go." And he said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I am the strictest rabbi. I have been the strictest rabbi on everything. I'm the strictest rabbi when it comes to the mitzvah of you shall live by them and not die by them. I'm strict. I don't take any chances, take any risks on that." So anyway, but back to the needing to push off the bris in the event that there is a danger. It's not, and then you can choose the day after that. It doesn't have to be immediately the next best day that's available. You can then be a bit more flexible on the day. But interestingly, the 8th day is also the number that transcends nature. 7 is natural, week, the order of the week. 8 is like Hanukkah. It's the one above nature. And so the bris day reminds us that when a child gets a bris, it's not a calculated decision that the child is making because they understand what they're about to sign up for. No, transcending even their rationality and their comprehension, this baby has become a Jew, and that's part of how we look at the entire connection to God. Now, then, when you come to Barabbas mitzvah age, then you can accept it with rationality. Now you're of age to comprehend, to understand, and now you can take it on and accept it with logic. But in the beginning, our whole relationship to Hashem is above logic. Why was the Kohen given this mission of being the one? Is he a doctor? Did he get a degree? Did he go to special leprosy school? I mean, what was his qualifications? One qualification: is that he was sensitive to the needs and the issues that the Jews were going through. He didn't judge them. He didn't look down at them. He didn't, like we mentioned last week on Shabbos, when I said Aaron was specifically the one to be Kohen because he knew what it was like to fail when it came to the story of the golden calf. He knew what it was like to have a blunder and a mistake and feel terrible about it and then repair it. So he would be the last guy to judge somebody when they came in and they had this malady. He would be like, wow, you holy Jew, you're one of the special ones that is able to detect it, and you're able to see that Hashem gave you this gift of a sign that you need to be curtailed a little bit. Yeah, good on you. Made him feel good about himself, made her feel good, and told her, I'll be with you, I'll check you again. So much so that there's a line that says he would look at the nega, he would look at the lesion, and then he would look at the person, V'rao HaKohen V'timeoto. He would have to look at the person in addition to the lesion, which means he's a first holistic doctor, saying, I'm looking that you have a spot, but then I have to take a step back, I have to look at you. Before I give my ruling, whether or not you are tameh, I have to look at all of you. Why is that necessary? Because what if the guy was 2 days before his wedding? Right? 2 days before his wedding, and he gets a lesion. What are you going to do? You're going to tell him now, no, you got the lesion, you go into the quarantine, you get out of the camp, you can't be with anybody. I'm waiting. I've got the invitations out. What am I going to do? So the Kohen was tasked with looking at the entire person, saying, oh, you're the chassan, you're the groom, you're getting married in 2 days. You know what? We're going to delay me telling you that you're tameh. You might be, but not yet. Not yet. Have your wedding, have your marriage, and then maybe afterwards I'll check it again, and then I'll say you're tameh. That's looking at the person, not just the ailment. We can be very square sometimes when it comes to right and wrong. No, you need to be, every child, you need to be punished. You did this wrong, you did that wrong. It doesn't work that way. Every child, every person needs to be looked at holistically in their individual case. Sometimes we can adjust accordingly. As somebody who's just starting to come close to Judaism and Torah, you're not going to scream at him and say, "Oh, you just ate pork! I can't believe you did that. What are you doing?" You're now impure. You did something wrong. No. But if somebody who is a religious Jew, and somebody who was observant their whole life, and they did that, you might make it a little bit more of a big deal about it because you might say you're at the level where you expect better, you should do better. And that's putting it in context of where that person is. There's there's so many areas to Judaism where this becomes a very important approach to how to deal with people.
If someone did something like that, you're not supposed to judge them.
Right, we're talking about educating, right? So you're talking about educating. Let's say it's a child, right? So the child is acting up, right? The child's acting up, and your job is to discipline or educate. Now, what if you find out that this child is going through a crisis at home, right? There's an issue with the parents are fighting, and this child is just letting it out in class. You would want to know that, so you would be sensitive to that child's specific behavior and not just say, come on, get in line, do the right thing. That's what it means. It's not that you're in a position to ever really have to judge because you're not God, but maybe sometimes if you're in a position where you could be a positive influence on somebody, it's important to know, like, the lady who stole the loaf of bread because her daughter just had a baby and she had no sustenance. Right, so you can't, but there's certain things that you would look at from a big picture. There's a story of Rabbi Levin. Rabbi Levin was a rabbi in Jerusalem, and he had students who sometimes were religious and sometimes were not. Anyway, there was one kid who was not so religious, and maybe he was, but then he went away a little bit. And he was walking down the street, and Rabbi Levin was coming from the other way. This is a few years after he was his teacher. And he wasn't wearing a yarmulke. He was a bit self-conscious, a bit embarrassed. My teacher, my rabbi, is going to see me without a yarmulke. So he crosses over the street. He crosses over the street so the rabbi shouldn't see him. And the rabbi sees him crossing over the street. And he realizes he's probably running away from him. So he calls after him. He says, Ruvain, Ruvain, don't run away. I wanted to say hello. So he said, oh, hello. I just a bit embarrassed. So he said, what are you embarrassed about? He said, you see, I'm not wearing a yarmulke. So he says, Ruvain, you see me, I'm a very, very short man. I'm only like 5'2". And you're a big guy. You're almost 6 feet. My eyes don't go that high to see your yarmulke. You know where my eyes go to see on you? My eyes are on the level of your heart. That's what I see. I see your heart. And I know who you are. I know who you are in your heart. I don't know what's going on in your head. So the idea of being able to take a step back, as the Kohen's requirement was to do, and to say, I'm not just going to be a doctor who says, it's the right yellow, it's the right white, it's the right color, oh, it's the wrong color, just do on a technicality. There are doctors that do that. Doctors do that. Just look at the actual symptoms, give a ruling. But the best doctors look at the whole body, say, who are we dealing with here? What have you been eating? I've known you for years. You know, what have been some of your ailments that you've had and in the past you've overcome? Maybe it's something connected with that. And you know what? There's another thing to that. There's a very important thing to that, and that is that there's two ways of healing the patient. And this is part of the Kohen's job as well. You could heal the actual symptom, which means you hone in on the fact that he said Lashon Hara. You say, you got to do better with your words. You're healing the illness. You know one thing you can do as well? That's a real method of healing, is you don't address the sickness. You strengthen the rest of the body. And you make the rest of the body so strong with all vitamins and minerals that it needs, it pushes out the sickness. It doesn't have it anymore as even something that it's able to have any strength, because the rest of the body has become so strong. So imagine if the Kohen's approach to the guy is this. I'm not going to talk about your mistake. I'm going to talk about the areas of your life that I know you are so successful in, you're so strong in. Let's build on that. And by default, you'll end up going back to saying all the right things as well. But if you try and hone in on the negative and try and bash that, sometimes it builds a resistance to you. It comes back stronger and say, oh, you're not going to. And it's like the diets, right? The diets say, I'm not going to eat that cake. And what happens? You have a desire to eat that cake like never before, right? And everywhere you look, all you see is cake. And you're like, I got to eat it. But if you somehow fill your fridge with all these other foods that are healthier and this, and you don't have the option to eat cake, because it's just everything else has become strengthened. So that has to be the approach of the Kohen as well. Not to hone in on the malady, to strengthen the rest of the body, see the whole person, and know what their potential is outside of that.